Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. And today, part 3 of our 007 marathon, we're going to talk about the end of the official Sean Connery run, and then we'll start a brand new era with Roger Moore. The films are Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and The Man with the Golden Gun. We'll talk about them all right here on Movie Marathon Mood, so stick around.
Welcome to hell, Blofeld.
He's back.
Good evening.
And we're back to what great movies are all about.
Hey, what the hell is this? Hey, listen, you can't do this to me. I've got friends in this town.
Outrageous, fun-making thrills.
I didn't know there was a pool down there.
And we're back. Episode 3 of our James Bond marathon. I'm Jesse Gilstrap, joined here with my buddy Drew Cordell. Drew, how's it going, friend?
Oh, it's going fabulously, Jesse. How about yourself?
Doing all right. We are not even halfway through getting through these Bond movies, but we are entering into a brand new era here in several ways with these 3 movies that we're watching, or that we just watched.
That's right. We got the last Connery movie and the first two Roger Moores.
Uh, First movies in the 1970s. Yeah, lot to talk about. So Diamonds Are Forever obviously brought back Sean Connery after he had left for one movie, and they managed to convince him to come back with a bang and a huge, huge paycheck.
Mhm.
And they tried to get him to come back again, even after Diamonds Are Forever. But I think I've read the equivalent of $30 million in today's money is
Wow.
what they paid Connery to come back for Diamonds Are Forever, which is pretty crazy, obviously. But it did the trick. It does beg the question a little bit: what made him come back the most? Was it wanting to finish on better terms, or was it the huge paycheck? Or I have a feeling a lot of it was probably the paycheck, but nonetheless, I think he does care for the Bond character, though. I feel like that's evidenced, even if nobody wants to be typecast. I feel like he did care about the Bond character
Right.
as well. So it's not like he wouldn't want to come back to that in so many ways. And Diamonds Are Forever is not even the end of his story with James Bond. It's just the end of his official
Right.
run as James Bond. More on that in the not too distant future. But for now, officially, Diamonds Are Forever, the last Sean Connery Bond movie. What say you about this Bond adventure, Drew?
Well, there's a lot to say about it. I mentioned earlier that I've seen this one several times. I don't really know why. I mean, that's not a slap to the movie or anything. Uh, I don't know why as a kid that one really like spoke to me that I watched it so many times, but I did because we had them on tape and I like chose to watch that one. And obviously there were other ones I watched a lot too, but that one was one of them that I watched the most. And I I don't know why as a kid I did, but I can tell you right now this is probably one of the most I'm not going to say in terms of quality, but just entertainment and enjoyable. This is one of the most enjoyable Bond movies. I was laughing the entire time, and it definitely has its tongue in cheek. It's not taking. It's kind of back in the approach of you only live twice, but kind of that turned up to 11. Um, it's that kind of thing, and this kind of sets up a tradition where like the last Bond movie of a actor's run is kind of this huge romp, and whether that's a good or a bad thing is um, up in the air. Really kind of depends on the actor too. But this is just a fun movie. I You start off with the 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 pre-title sequences, uh, Bond hunting down Blofeld after the events of um, Her Majesty's Secret Service after Tracy's been killed. But don't worry, it's not that serious. It's hilarious. The Charles Gray plays Blofeld, and he was actually played another character in You Only Live Twice. And we talked about the different Blofelds. We talked about how Donald Pleasance was clearly the best,
Right.
and Telly Savalas is physically uh, very kind of threatening, and he is a good actor, but he didn't necessarily fit uh, Blofeld perfectly, or it didn't gel perfectly in that movie. Well, Charles Gray is not physically threatening, and he doesn't have any of the physical traits of either the previous Blofelds, but his performance is pretty awesome. It's funny. He does a good job of just delivering the dialogue cleverly. He's The character in this is just silly, as is the movie, and you get that right off the bat. Uh, and from there on, before we get heavy into the movie, I just want to point out, and we mentioned him last episode um, a little bit, but I really want to kind of point out how amazing John Barry is as a composer, because the music in these movies, especially the ones that he did, are the score is great, and this in Diamonds Are Forever is no exception.
Oh yeah.
There are cues that were used in other movies too. He recycles them, but he updates them. It's not just copy and pasting, and it just really serves each of these movies pretty well. And this movie has some great score, and the song Shirley Bassey is back to do the song. This song isn't as good as Goldfinger, but it's a pretty good Bond song. The title track, "Diamonds Are Forever." It's another good Bond song, and she'll go on to do another one in this episode, but it's not as good as the first two she does. It's got all the trappings. The storyline is kind of laughable, but they don't take it too seriously. I enjoy the just the gay henchman villains, which one of them is Crispin Glover's father, which is hilarious.
Bruce.
Bruce, that's right, Bruce Glover. Yeah, it is. The scenes with them are hilarious. Speaking of other actors that appear in this one, the Shady Tree gang and the limo drivers are the ones that are always picking Bond up that I guess work for Blofeld. It's kind of hard to tell. This movie doesn't. I don't think this movie knows what the plot is most of the time. It doesn't really matter. But one of them is a very young Sid Haig, now famous for many Rob Zombie movies that he was in as Captain Spaulding. And then another actor, I can't think of his name, but he's actually in The Man with the Golden Gun in the opening scene, playing a different character. So, you get a lot of little cameos or unexpected appearances and recycled actors. Like I said, Charles Gray was already in and Live Twice, and now he's playing Blofeld. We have Jill St. John as Tiffany Case, a smuggler, or she's wanting to move these diamonds around. She's working for Blofeld, but not really knowing what she's gotten into. Bond has to go undercover as Peter Franks, this smuggler who's going to work for Tiffany Case and get the diamonds out of, move them out and all this stuff. And the elevator fight is hilarious between those two. It's just amped up. Like everything in this movie is just so amped up, and I think that's why I love it. It just kind of, it puts the tongue in its cheek. It just takes off. Everything's turned up to 11. The car chase in Las Vegas is kind of fun. There's a lot of fun stunts. I mean, like we said the last time on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the stunt team really stepped up rather, and kind of defined what the stunt work was going to be in Bond movies from now on, and they kept that going in this one. We have have real good car chase, have some great stunts in the ending of the movie and the great big climax, and there's just there's just so much going for it. Now it is rather silly. There's a lot of stuff that is just very stupid. But again, that's kind of the tone that it's going for. I wouldn't, if we were having to do our top 007, I don't know if this one would make my cut now. Uh, but it is very enjoyable. It's a lot of fun, and it is a good send off to Connery because he does do a good job in this, and you can tell he was getting old, and he had despite the fact that he still comes back later, even though not officially, but still, this was a good send off for him. Some of his best one liners are in this. Some of the best innuendo. I will not defend the treatment of women in this movie at all, but it's comical. You can tell it's almost parody. It's not like Thunderball where it's like, oh, he gets all the girls. Like it's just ridiculous in this. Plenty O'Toole. Oh, you must have been named after your father. I presume that I about fell off my couch watching that. It just there's just so much. There's just so much in this movie. I think that's the best way I can describe this. There's just so much in it, whether it's innuendo or um, just silly lines. It's everything um, cranked up, and then the classic after the villain's dead henchman comeback scene on the cruise ship. That also had me laughing hysterically. Mr. Witt and Mr. Kidd showing up as room service for them. Um, and I'm sure you'll mention some more. Another thing, I mean, why is Jimmy Dean in this movie? Um, I don't know, but it fits. It's hilarious. Seeing Blofeld speak and the voice of Jimmy Dean come out is something that just never ceases to crack me up. Willard White speaking. I'm giving it a 005 out of 007. It's fun. Like a diamond, it's rough around the edges. I think we could have gotten a great movie out of this. I think if it was fine tuned, maybe if it was had a little more, I'm not going to say seriousness, but had a little bit more attention, a little bit more, and a little bit less of other things. Like the opening scene and that that horrendous dub of the Chinese or Japanese. I don't think they're sure. Uh, I think it's Japan. The guy he's twisting his arm. He's like, "Where is Blofeld?" He's like, Cairo." A little less of that, but still, I feel like we could have gotten a really good Bond movie out of this, or a great Bond movie out of this. But we got a pretty solid one. It's fun to watch. And like I said, it's a good send off for Connery. I think in terms of just his charm is in the front seat in this, and he's very much a we talked about Thunderball. It was a huge movie, but it's like he was barely in it. In this, he's very, very much in it. Yeah, I'll stand by 005 out of 007. This one's a good one to end the Connery legacy. It could have been better, and it's you know, just kind of the end of that era, but it's also the first of the 70s, like we talked about. It feels like a good launch into the 70s and a good end to Connery's run.
Well, we also mentioned that all three movies that we're watching in this episode are Guy Hamilton directed movies, which is interesting, and also at the same time there are similarities and differences between all of them, which is fascinating. Obviously, the first one he had done is Goldfinger,
Right,
which is the gold standard template for a Bond movie. And here we are, they brought him back. One of the most successful movies. I'm sure that they were, to some degree, hoping to replicate that. And certainly, all three of these movies at least did pretty well. They did really good business, that's for sure. But I don't know. Diamonds Are Forever is. I agree with you. I will actually go ahead and say 005 uh, out of 007. It that sounds like a good point for that movie to kind of rest at, because there's a lot of strong points. It's just probably a little bit too silly in some regard in terms of not being as perfect as it could be. And to some degree, I hate saying that because obviously silly in a certain direction, and I would love it completely, and it could be even better in that regard. It's
right.
it's a matter of all the pieces maybe not coming completely together to really sell all those points. Um, Especially like the gadget idea of you're talking about dub voices. That's probably one of the weaker points to me because I'm like that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, I made one of those for my kids last Christmas. Uh, Q says
Oh, right.
when Bond wants one for himself, and it's like that just undermines the whole idea. I mean, obviously Q is brilliant, but undermines the whole idea of that even being an important device or
Right.
advanced device. A device. It's but I don't want to come down too harshly on a movie because it's definitely a fun ride, and it comes off that way right from the start. Um, and speaking of treatment of women, you get Bond strangling a woman with their bikini top. That's pretty quick off the top of the movie, which is just a great Bond moment to be like, oh, okay, yeah. You're right to say that it's almost on the edge of parody of what Bond is, especially in that specific regard when it comes to treatment of women. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's not disturbing though either. It works for what it is,
No.
uh, while at the same time maybe not being as great as the earliest Bond movies, uh, in all kinds of
No.
ways. And at the same time, Connery is really good. He's a good Bond. We don't have the best Blofeld, but I think it works pretty well seeing Blofeld, even though I would like a world where that story was even better developed. I like Blofeld in this movie. I like Tiffany Case as a Bond girl,
Yes.
but at the same time, I think it's absurd when she can't handle a machine gun and just falls off the edge of the base into the water. That's the best part of that is the fact that Bond doesn't even notice it happened until he's done. throwing Blofeld around
Right.
on the crane, and he's like, "Oh, hey, where are you?" You know. But you also like one of the best parts is the henchman. I definitely think that has to be brought up again, just to say that Mr. Kidd and Mr. Wint, that's a classic Bond characters that I haven't seen this movie as much as you've seen this movie, but I remember them and a lot of their moments, sort of moments that as I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, I 100% remember those guys. Of all the things I remembered in this movie, I remember them, and I don't know, in a way, like imagining them being in an even better movie
Yeah.
that could have been even more fun. And like I said, I don't even want to come down too harshly on the movie, because like talking about You Only Live Twice, that one is so kind of feverishly over the top
Yeah.
in some of the best ways, but this one is also over the top, but with not as many big visual effects. And a lot of that simply has to do with the fact that they paid Connery a whole lot of money,
Right.
so they didn't go as crazy with the visuals. So they went over the top in other ways, but it's a different kind of over the top, just in general. Still a blast to watch, though.
Yeah.
Overall, like I said, 005 out of 007, probably the fairest place for it to be. Certainly not at the tip top of what a Bond movie could be or what it could have been to itself, but still a very fun movie and also not a bad way to send Connery off. It's a better way to send Connery off than Thunderball, that's for sure. And in some ways, I think it's probably a better way to send him off than You Only Live Twice. And we talked about that movie. It's not like we dislike it either. It's just this one feels like, even though it's more over the top than the first Bond movies, it's over the top in such a way that I'm like, okay, maybe Connery could have had an even better send off, but this is a pretty good one.
Oh god. Yeah. It has the trappings of some of those earlier ones, and the music is fantastic, and it kind of gives you a feel of some of those older movies as well. Kind of the cue that started in From Russia with Love, the 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 reuse of that in this is fantastic.
Right.
Um, it kind of feels like a send off to that whole era musically too. It's definitely got its weak points, but the presentation as a whole, it's a fun movie to watch, and it is if you view it as this is the last Connery of the official series, it has that feel to it, and um, it's fitting. So yeah, I wish we could have gotten maybe a little tighter rein on things, maybe something to bring it in to make a greater movie. But we got what we got, and it is fun. It is not Goldfinger by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a fun outing for sure.
It's fun and it feels like Bond.
Right.
But Connery did not come back in spite of them even trying to pay him even more money, because they certainly tried to pay him even more, and he actually said no, completely no. But one of the things I want to mention before we talk about the guy who they did get, uh, some of the names that were tossed around that they had considered or offered a part to: Adam West and Burt Reynolds. I can't even imagine Adam West. I can actually imagine more than Burt Reynolds,
Right.
but holy cow, Burt Reynolds is James Bond. I have no idea what the world would look like if Burt Reynolds had played James Bond.
Oh,
That is such a wild thought. but what we ended up getting, I think it's interesting that a lot of the names that they looked at are actors like that that in some way or other had a comical edge to them. And
Right.
Roger Moore embodies that in a way that I think is pretty much the perfect balance, where you got the silliness, and obviously I think this is proven over his run as Bond. Uh, he has no problem with going as silly as you can be.
Right.
Blessing and a curse that he's willing to go that crazy. But at the same time, he is able to take it seriously and still embody the character in a lot of ways, in a different way than Connery, but in a way that I really like. And plenty of people have
Right.
said lots of things about who's the best Bond and so forth. I really like Roger Moore as James Bond. I might prefer Connery, but I feel like in some ways you're splitting hairs. I like what Moore offers to the part. And the biggest argument in some ways for Connery is just that has a better track record probably, like his average in general, and we'll have a better feel for that after we've watched them all of Roger Moore's movies as Bond. But I don't know, like Live and Let Die. I mentioned this before too. What a weird start to Bond, for a new Bond. This black exploitation kind of movie.
007 is on a worldwide manhunt. The body count is going up. And where Bond stops to visit, he leaves his mark.
Another thing I mentioned way back in the beginning of Bond is how well they've adapted to the times.
Right.
And that's something that's kept the series alive for 6 decades. But
Yeah.
it's really apparent here in just the first two Roger Moore movies alone, that they're really trying for trends
Right.
and black exploitation movies is a weird trend to latch on to. I would argue that not to get ahead of ourselves, not to get ahead of ourselves, but kung fu movies makes more sense
Yes.
for James Bond than black exploitation movies. Again, more on that when we get to Man with the Golden Gun. But Live and Let Die is, in spite of what I would call its peculiarities, is a really good start for Roger Moore as Bond, and it's so fun, and it's
It
wild, and
it is.
again, I'm trying not to get ahead of myself in terms of talking about Man with the Golden Gun, but if I'm just going to be picky about certain aspects, there's one aspect that pops up in both movies and is one of the most outlandish aspects of both movies, and that's Sheriff Pepper. That is
Yeah.
one majorly over the top aspect of both movies.
Yes, and I will argue that before, I don't want to interrupt your take on it, but
Go ahead.
I will argue that it makes more sense for him to be in Live and Let Die than it does for him to be in Man with the Golden Gun. But that's the only argument I have. It's still ridiculous. The only thing that makes sense about him being in Live and Let Die is the location of him being in Louisiana, sheriff, and Bond is in Louisiana. That's it. That's where it ends. That's where my argument ends. Everything else, why is he in these movies? But it's still hilarious. But that's not always a good thing.
Well, I have to say too that I am. I'm grateful that he's only in these two movies,
Yes.
and because if they kept trying to pop him up in all kinds of different places, I don't know if Bond would be my thing at all. If they kept finding ways to bring him up, like if he pops up in No Time to Die somehow, like the character, I don't think I could appreciate the reference, you know. But no, like it's funny because I think it's even over the top in Live and Let Die, but I don't disagree with you that it makes more sense in Live and Let Die. It fits more. And if he wasn't in The Man with the Golden Gun, I might just be more critical of him here. But instead, I'm like, oh, it's better here. It's funny to have that comparison. But no, I one thing that I'll say too is when it comes to our villains in here and Kananga and all the crew with their peculiar names and characteristics like Teehee, which is just and Whisper, like absolutely absurd concepts for henchmen and giving them those names. I kind of in again a better version of this movie. uh, I would like to know even more about how they operate because
Yeah.
it's a little bit too just absurd. It feels like they set them up well and end up not doing enough with them, and that's kind of my impression of them as an evil organization. At least that's part of my extrapolation from them as a group. On top of not knowing how important it was for Kananga to be in disguise, Mission Impossible style. That's also um, no. I uh, also thinking about like Jane Seymour in this movie. I like Jane Seymour a lot, and I actually think she comes off pretty well as a Bond girl. That's one aspect of this movie that I like as well. There's a lot of fun to be had, and I feel like it's interesting just to go back to a previous point that Roger Moore seems to settle into the character right from the jump. And I said the same thing about Connery and Doctor No, which is just they seem to immediately be these characters, but in distinctly different ways. I mean, the way we were introduced to Moore as Bond isn't him playing cards or playing cool. It's him being with a woman and nearly being caught by his boss, which is a fun dynamic, and it fits his portrayal, I think, really well. That we're not introduced to him
Right.
being super suave. We're introduced to him trying to hide his lady friends.
Right.
And something else that I think is interesting about Moore as Bond is he does a really good job of never seeming to get lost in his own whimsy, if that
Right.
makes any sense at all. Like if he is with a woman, he's always seems to still be thinking about the job, which is a fascinating characteristic for him. And also at the same time, the way that the movie plays with that, one of my favorite moments in Live and Let Die is when he is sentenced to die and he's getting in an alleyway and he looks at the garbage heap and he's maybe going to grab a metal post, and the bad guys that are taking him notice that he sees it,
Right.
so he's not able to use that, and then instead he uses the stairs and pulls that down on him. But like it's fun to see them put thought into that sort of aspect of the movie, like him having to think on his feet more instead of just quickly responding. He has to kind of think on his feet. There's a lot of cleverness in those little details that I really appreciate. And on top of that, some absolutely absurd stunts that I love a lot. They get a lot of mileage out of being in Louisiana and being on the boats and that makes for some really fun sequences.
It does. Despite J.W. Pepper being there.
Right. In spite of that, I still like that sequence a great deal. I feel like that's the edge that they didn't need at all. But at the same time, I can appreciate the level of stunt work,
Right.
which is also true in Man with the Golden Gun.
Yeah.
What do you think about Live and Let Die?
Uh, well, I'm gonna go ahead and throw my rating out, and I'm gonna give this one a 006 out of 7. It's not quite great, but it's got a little extra kick than You Only Live Twice or Diamonds Are Forever, to where it's fun. It kind of feels dangerous, but it's still silly, but it's not too silly. There are a lot of things that are too silly in it, but as a whole, there are some great things about it. You mentioned Kananga, who is played none other than by Yafet Koto, who also played in Alien,
Yes,
Parker in Alien.
one of the best.
Yes,
Yeah,
and he is. You were talking about the villains in this movie. I agree with you that I think that there could have been more to him, but just the look and aesthetic of these characters, He's got a prosthetic arm. You got Whisper. You got Baron Samedi. You got some really cool characters, and of course, Kananga is revealed to be the Mr. Big. It's got a great aesthetic to it that I feel like kind of set the stage for Jaws, even who come later, for these henchmen to have even an extra step up in appearance, something to really, and it's kind of a 70s thing too, I suppose, but just kind of have these extra qualities that they had not even had before in the Connery era. Just kind of have like these super human or enhancements, what have you, that really change the game a little bit. And I think that's a big part of this movie. You mentioned Jane Seymour as Solitaire, and she's great in this as well. I like that she has some psychic ability. I'm not going to say this the first is this the first instance of a little bit of supernatural? It might be.
I'm pretty sure it is.
It's not
Yeah.
too much. You're dealing with voodoo. You're dealing with those kind of things, some tarot readings, and it fits.
Well, even if you go back to Doctor No, they reference the idea of a dragon, and
Right.
Bond writes it off completely as absurd, and it is proven to be obviously nothing like a real dragon, nothing like something that would be that fantastic. So, Live and Let Die takes that inherent sense of not realism always, but non-magical approach, and immediately dispels of that. It's like, no, we're in a different era now, folks. Connery would laugh at magic.
Right. Yeah. Until League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but and the first two Highlander movies, but that, but no, I agree. He would have not done. He would have thrown a fit. I think. I don't think he could have been in this. I think that was one thing I was gonna say, is that I this is very much a Roger Moore movie, which is great. That's a great way to start an era, is to have something that in the long run feels like it could have only been this actor playing Bond. And it kind of goes with, what you just said about him fitting into the character so well. He does. And instant, that scene where he's with the Italian agent from a previous off-screen mission, and M comes to the apartment and he's having to hide her and all that stuff. It's very Bond, but it's very more Bond. It's it's his own spin on it. There's a lot more, especially in these first two movies. Good grief. of just silly stuff with women hiding in closets. Like it's in both movies. Uh,
Yeah, it is. It's very childish. Yeah,
yeah, it really is, but it's still funny. I mean, the gadgets don't really play much of a role in this one, but you have the watch with some magnetism, um, sheer magnetism, as Roger Moore says, as he uses it to open up the closet after him and Monty Penny have left, and,
and the zipper.
and then unzips her dress with it. Yeah, it's just ridiculous, but it's very Roger Moore.
I'll mention this too, though, when it comes to the magnet, is when he's trying to get the boat to come to him, and it ends up turns out that it's connected still,
Yeah,
or he not able to get it to come all the way out to little piece of land that he's on. Thought a gators coming at him, and that's another aspect, like I was talking about, where things don't work out immediately for him. He's having to work out a solution, and that's something that puts this movie over the top for me too. Um, Not as perfect as it could be, but in terms of being a really good movie and a great introduction for Roger Moore.
and I don't know if that is a script thing or a Guy Hamilton thing because in Goldfinger he really scrambles a lot.
He does, yeah.
It's not something a lot of people remember about Goldfinger because it is kind of this essential Bond movie that has so many classic moments. But Bond really scrambles that whole movie and it isn't on top of things. And that's kind of comes back here. I don't know, man. I really do enjoy this one. Like they could have built up or explained and given more to do to the henchmen in this movie. But what we get is very unique. It's not your typical scarred villain that wants to take over the world with a satellite. It's not that kind of Bond movie, and it doesn't have to be. The lair, Kananga's lair at the end, I thought was really cool. The sharks. You've got some things from the Connery era that come back, but are kind of done in their own way. The way Kananga dies is awesome. He freaking blows up. Um, and it's completely ridiculous. You get your post villain henchman attack with Teehee on the train, and the way that's done too is also comical but fun. And some of the best Bond scenes with henchmen take place on trains. Just saying, it's a thread. Started all the way back with From Russia with Love, but and this is nowhere near that. But it's still fun. And I remember, an iconic image that they never did anything with is Baron Samedi being still, alive after being thrown in a coffin of snakes, laughing on the train, on top of the train at the end, which was kind of a promise that, hey, he might, might be back. He never was, but just a little bit of truth. We mentioned Goldeneye in our first episode, the game. Baron Samedi was
Right.
a character you could play as in multiplayer, which I always thought was kind of interesting. Because I do think Live and Let Die is popular, but it's not one of the most popular Bond movies. I don't hear people fans talk about it as much, even in films from the Moore era. But to me, it's a solid start, and John Barry was busy; he couldn't do the score, so it's scored by none other than George Martin, producer of the Beatles, and that's because Paul McCartney did and Wings did the song, which is one of the best Bond songs of all time.
Yeah, we can't not mention that song. It's fantastic.
Yeah, easily one of the best Bond songs. we went from Diamonds Are Forever, which is a great Bond song, to one of the best with Live and Let Die. The music here is pretty good. I like it. It's unique with this George Martin did it. It's kind of got that it's got that vibe that it needs for this story. I don't know if it would have been good if he kept scoring the movies, but he did a good job with this and it fit this one. Another thing we need to throw out there, well, two things. The actor that plays Leiter in this actually reprises his role later. I think he is the only one to reprise the Leiter role until the Craig era.
Yeah. Leiter doesn't even appear as a character in the rest of the Roger Moore era.
Right. Not until it's a completely different Bond. We won't see him again until License to Kill, which is crazy. But yeah, Leiter was very much an aspect of the Connery Bonds, but not so much the Moore at all. And the Rosie, I wanted to mention Rosie. We have our first interracial love scene in Bond, which was a huge deal at the time. The character was kind of silly, her just kind of turning tail, so to speak, and turning out to sort of be a traitor and then run away and instantly die was really silly. But it's still to be noted for its cultural implication at the time. But just I think the Moore era is a lot of fun. I want to say that before we move on to Man with the Golden Gun. I really do think that it is a fun era. There's a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but all through it, he's still Roger Moore. He's never the bad factor of it. It might be his decision to be like, oh yeah, let's let it be that silly, but his performance as Bond is always on point. This is about a start to a character's reign or an actor's reign on the character you get. I think in a lot of ways it's a better start, or it is a better start than Doctor No was for Connery. Even though Doctor No is, I wouldn't want it any other way, other than maybe a little bit better of a movie. But just in terms of where they started, I feel like Roger Moore started off on a better foot as far as the film goes.
My rating for Live and Let Die is the same as yours. It's a 006 because I like I said, I have complaints. I wish that they did more with with the villains, and but I also think that the villains, like you said, are just so unique and different that there's a
Got
lot of pluses to that too, to the style of that New Orleans flavor and voodoo that is fun and works well. And plus, I mentioned the stunt work being good, but I didn't mention the alligator stunt, which is absolutely insane. Running across all those gators, it's insane, but it's
yes, awesome.
awesome at the same time. And I just mentioned one quick other thing before we move on, which is Mrs. Bell, which I only know the name because I'm looking at the cast list, but the lady who Bond takes for a ride on her plane
Oh yes,
when they were she was suspecting a flying lesson, and then Bond ends up riding her around, and that is the type of silliness I expect in a Roger Moore Bond movie in the some of the best ways, because I probably like her bit more than I like our sheriff. And mentioning the sheriff is probably as good a transition as we can get to start talking about our next movie.
Roger Moore, back in action in the exotic East as James Bond, 007, on a collision course with the most dangerous man alive, the man with the golden gun. sir.
Stay in there, good night. We've got you spotted.
How about demonstration, boy?
Certainly, sir.
Monsieur Scaramanga will welcome you personally.
The target is the highest priced killer in the world. He plays a deadly game, and the stakes are sky high.
Man with the Golden Gun has one of the best villains that the series has ever had. And part of that, I mean, well, the big part of it is, yes, it's Christopher Lee. So you know whether there's something there or not there, he's going to make it be there, regardless if it's in the script or not. But this is a really conflicting movie for me because there's so much I love in this. It was another one I watched a lot when I was a kid. This one is more, I could see Connery being in this one in some ways because this one has more of a vibe of the older Bonds for the most part. Not certain scenes like the the Hong Kong stuff. You know, you were mentioning Kung Fu. Bruce Lee was at the top of the world at that point. So them doing a martial arts sequence, sure, why not? But kind of the mystery, like Bond is having to investigate. It actually feels like an investigation. The opening sequence has Scaramanga, the man with the golden gun, taking on a gangster in his lair. And again, actor was in Diamonds Are Forever as he's the one who throws Plenty O'Toole out the window in Diamonds Are Forever. Or when that he didn't throw her, but he has the awesome line when Connery's like, excellent shot. It's like, I didn't know there was a pool down there. Well, this is the same guy, the same actor. And there's tension in this movie that isn't in some of the other Moore movies, and definitely not in the latter Connery movies. And that's one thing I love about it. Like his maze, everything in the his lair is just amazing. That island is amazing. I love the look of it. It's one of the best villain lairs, which is awesome, but it also doesn't really make sense since he's just kind of an assassin. But it fits. I love it. I love like his room that has all like the mirror maze and everything in it. I love Nick Nack as a henchman. I love that, he kind of plays this game. And then, you have the shot of Bond wax figure that he shoots after he's killed this gangster. And it sets up something that I don't think has been touched on as well since From Russia with Love is kind of building up this tension that someone is after Bond, someone that's actually a threat to him. And I love that about this movie. What I hate is that there's so much goofy stuff in it that kind of throws it off balance, that it makes the tone of that not stick as well. Because there are great scenes with Christopher Lee in this movie. And the things directly related to that, to Scaramanga and Bond and the plot, I already can't remember her name because I'm looking it up. Maud Adams' character in this, of course, she eventually plays Octopussy in another Bond movie again, showing that we'll have some recycled actors here and there. Andrea Anders, there we go. I really liked a lot of that stuff with her in it, and with with her fate, with Scaramanga kind of playing these games with Bond. It's a tension that I don't think has been in the movies in the Bond movies since the early Connery days, and it's welcome and I love it. And then the finale, the big duel between the two at the end is great, and it's built up too well. Like I don't is I feel like as a whole it fits the film, but then you have the kung fu stuff, which, like you said, it makes sense, and the stunt work is incredible. And then the chase scene with Sheriff Pepper, who for some reason is vacationing there, and thankfully we never see him again. It kind of takes the movie in a direction that I don't think fits. It's not cohesive with the main part of what this movie is trying to be. So it's more distracting than it is in Live and Let Die to me, even though it's even distracting in Live and Let Die, but it's much more of a bump in the road for me in this one. Because what is good is so good, and then you have this, and I'm not even saying it's bad, but it just doesn't fit. And then I also think Miss Goodnight is kind of a bad Bond girl. She's just kind of dumb. Like I liked Andrea Anders. Maud Adams is great. I would have even like not having a Bond girl in this one would have been okay with me. Like having Anders be the main Bond girl would have been fine, even if she died as the story goes. Because Goodnight doesn't really serve any purpose in this other than be a clumsy idiot and be the love interest, the quote unquote love interest. It's just uh, that's the other thing that works for me. It kind of breaks my heart what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to give this 005, which is not a bad rating, but this could be a 007, really. This could be one of the best. And there's just so much that brings it kind of to that level again, which is not a bad level to be on. It could be much worse. Ugh, there's so much great in it, and there's just so much silly stuff in it that kind of brings it down. And you know, the song, I think it works very well as like a theme in terms of the score that's used with it. But it is the worst Shirley Bassey song, which when her other songs have been Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever, calling something the worst is kind of silly because those two are great songs. Goldfinger is obviously one of the best Bond songs ever. But I'm not a big fan of the song The Man with the Golden Gun as a song. But the theme, of course, John Barry returned to do the score. The score is good as always. But I don't know, Jesse. Like, there's just so much. There's so much I love in this, and of course, Christopher Lee is fantastic. He's so good in this. He could have had more. There could have been a more. They could have stopped wasting time, like on some of those things. Why did we need Sheriff Pepper in this when we could have had more Christopher Lee, especially now? I mean, now looking back, both Roger Moore and Christopher Lee and the actor that played Pepper are all dead, which is crazy to think about. But we could have had more Christopher Lee in that movie, and now we can't. So there's just a lot that upsets me about what that movie could be, but for what we get, it's a lot of fun, and I do really enjoy the kind of added tension, the mystery of Scaramanga, the build up to the duel itself. I love all those things. And then there's just so much silly stuff in it. I feel like this movie kind of represents my feeling. Again, I haven't seen a lot of the Roger Moore movies in a long time, but this one better represents my feelings on Roger Moore as a whole, where there are so many great moments in his movies and there's so much silly stuff that it kind of brings it down a notch for me. But he's a fun Bond. I cannot deny it. He's good in this as Bond. Just some of those little details that really kind of get me on it though. That's that's my stance on Man with the Gold. I was really wanting to give this 006 as a minimum, but I couldn't. watching it. That was just kind of my love for it in the past. I think really wanting to like it more than I did, and it's not as good as it should be.
No, I agree with you 100%. And that's all for this episode. No, I'm just kidding. I'll say, I want to say more. Um, but uh, no, Christopher Lee is the man. He is so amazing, and obviously was in so many movies. Not all of them are the best, but but he's always Christopher Lee, and this could have been a movie where he was the equal to Bond that they first set him up to be when they first wrote the script to this movie, and then they changed it so much that now he's no longer
Right.
in the version that we have. He's no longer just Bond's equal. Uh, he's more random, and it makes the movie more inconsequential. So that's the first problem, is minimizing
Yeah.
this potentially great villain. And my mind is unfortunately skipping ahead and thinking about uh, GoldenEye when it comes to equals to Bond and that theme, more on that kind of notion in different regards as we go ahead. But gosh, a movie with more Christopher Lee and less of the absurd directions this movie takes, it could have been one of the absolute best Bond movies, easily. But they, eh, again, the blessing and the curse of Roger Moore, and I don't want to blame him whole scale for this, because Lord only knows it's not his fault, and he's good. His performance is good. But one of the reasons Connery left is because he was fed up with some of the absurd directions the producers were willing to go to or wanting to go to, and Moore is like he's completely gung ho, and not to say he shouldn't be well spirited, but I wish in a way that he could have put up more of a fight. And I'm not trying to pin it on him. I'm just saying that's
Right.
the Moore era in general is this feeling of man, if only they, and there'll be more on that as we go ahead because we're about to watch Spy Who Loved Me in our next episode, and I'll be very curious to have a conversation about that. But when you get to a movie like Man with the Golden Gun, it's especially frustrating. And yeah, when you put it that way too, I'd already had my issues with Sheriff Pepper, obviously by bringing him up, but when you think about it in terms like we could have had less of him and more of Christopher Lee. And then it becomes even more upsetting because it's like,
Yeah.
why did you do that?
Right.
And they even undermine that stunt, not just by Pepper being there, but they have the slide whistle when they have one of the most incredible stunts ever in cinema history.
Oh
With the like, it's an incredible stunt, and instead you have that
God.
slide whistle as they're doing this flip over a broken bridge with a curve in it. Like it's an incredible stunt
Yeah.
watching that car flip and land on the other side, but made to be this absurdist moment. And I say that I don't think it bothers me quite as much as it bothers some people, but it is an unfortunate choice in
Right.
sound design when it's such an amazing stunt, and it just points to some problems in direction uh, for what the series should be and what this movie should be. I definitely don't think there needed to be any kung fu in this movie, even if I don't hate those sequences entirely. I just think, why are we doing this right now?
Right.
It's only frustrating because of the lack of focus, really. I'd also have to say that Nick Nack is a great henchman. I really enjoy that character as well. And I like the suggestion of death that they give him too, the suggestion of him being his own character and not just a henchman.
Right.
Like, man, if only they'd done even more with that. And obviously, you mentioned Goodnight, and which I already don't like even saying that out loud, but just as a name. But all the movies tonight and mentioned all the different main Bond girls in each of these movies, and I like the previous two, but I feel like this is a relatively weak bunch in the sense of them really having their own agency and being their own characters, and that's coming off of On Her Majesty's Secret Service too, and that's just another bit of frustration if you're wanting to see more and wanting to see an actual character, some instead of the complete weak sauce that you have in a character like Goodnight, especially. Like that's just dumb. I think that's probably the best way of just saying that. Yeah, she's just dumb and in the way, and like
Yeah.
why was she ever put there with him? And it feels forced. It really does feel forced. It didn't need to be anybody there, and instead she's introduced to kind of bumble and get in the way. It's what it seems like.
Well, I feel like later down the line in the Craig era, especially in Skyfall, you know, the Bond girl doesn't have to be the love interest. I don't want to jump to that movie
Right.
right now, but you can make the Bond girl, be someone who doesn't make it, someone that it doesn't, it doesn't have to be the Honey Rider or whatever. It doesn't have to be just the tradition. You can jazz it up and change it up. I feel like it would have done this movie a lot of good to not go that route and have a Bond girl, or at least develop something better. Because Goodnight is just, as written, a bumbling idiot. And it makes no sense why Bond would even be into her because she just is a bumbling idiot. I mean, she's so stupid. And it's very frustrating. It's extremely frustrating to have to watch the scenes with her and watch the scenes with Pepper and then think, oh, this is the same movie with Christopher Lee. Like, really?
Well, if you think back to Live and Let Die, which again has its own imperfections, you have a psychic main love interest Bond woman that's an interesting dynamic and
Right.
a character that you can at least invest in, that you
Yeah.
understand how she's connected to this story, and then you have also, as mentioned, the first interracial love scene in a Bond film and the import of that. Then you have uh, the women that he has to attack in the pool. Or am I thinking? Oh, I'm thinking that. Good grief! Now my brain's on sleepy mode here. It's Diamonds Are Forever, isn't it?
That's the.
Yeah. Oh man, we didn't mention Bambi and Thumper and Diamonds Are Forever. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I feel terrible about that.
Oh, I feel like livid at myself for not thinking of Bambi and Thumper and Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh, I see you met my friends, Bambi and Thumper.
Bigger point, like the Man with the Golden Gun really doesn't have any. Not that it has to have moments with women in the same ways, but both of the previous movies in this episode have these great moments with the female characters that utilizes the Bond women in different ways that
Yeah.
you like. What were they doing when they were making Man with the Golden Gun when it comes to like, oh, I guess we got to have some Bond girls in here somewhere, and here's Good Night. Like, okay, I don't you did you have to? You didn't have to.
Right.
I have to talk about Bambi and Thumper now. That is a fun sequence, and it's absurd and crazy, and it's again, it goes back to him like strangling a woman with their bikini top, like it's
Right.
him trying to drown two different women, and they walk in on him, and they don't immediately say, "Hey, bro, maybe don't drown two women in a pool." Um, and the fact that they're Bambi and Thumper, and had this great little fight sequence too. Yeah, that's part of the fun in Diamonds Are Forever. Back to Man with the Golden Gun though, I think a 005 out of 007 is a fair place to put it.
So we're unanimous again. Yeah, and it sucks to say that because the promise that this movie could be is it should be at least a 006, but it just ugh, there's just so much stupid stuff. And
Well, and also I mentioned earlier that all these movies were successful in some shape or form. The Man with the Golden Gun was disappointing even at the time in terms of its impact and success as a movie. It's one of the least successful Bond movies in the entire series,
that's interesting.
and it still made money. It just wasn't as big of a hit as the previous movies, but obviously not enough of a bomb to stop them from wanting to spend way more money on the next movie, which is The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to talk about three interesting movies for a variety of reasons. Spy Who Loved Me, which is one of my personal favorite Bond movies, and one that you have mentioned that you haven't seen as often. And the same was true for me and Diamonds Are Forever, like having not been overly familiar with it. And uh, actually having us come around with basically the same opinion, or very similar opinion at the very least. So I'm curious how we're going to end up on the other side of The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch it again because it's been I don't know how long. It's been a long time since I've seen it all the way through, and I had there are things I definitely remember about it, but there are other things I don't. So I'm really looking forward to it.
The other thing that I mentioned in a certain capacity when we were talking about You Only Live Twice is Star Wars, and the impact that Star Wars had on making everybody want to have their own Star Wars.
Yep.
And I referenced it on The Only Live Twice because I was just talking about studio mentality trying to replicate success, and the weird directions that they went in trying to choose talent to make You Only Live Twice. But with Moonraker, we actually have in the Bond series a direct response to Star Wars.
Yep.
We have to go in space. And I've always said that any series that goes on long enough ends up in space.
Right.
So it's not that shocking that we would get that here. And really not, well, obviously we were in space really for You Only Live Twice. So uh, to some degree. Moonraker is one of those movies that's kind of legendarily poor as a Bond movie, and I remember not hating it that much. So I'm really curious what I'm gonna think watching it because it's been a while.
I'm willing to give it another shot because again, it's been a long time since I've watched it, and I remember well, kind of double-edged sword because I remember liking it as a kid because of space and remember coming back and watching it as a teenager and being like what is this um and that was the last time I saw it, so it's been 15, 20 years since I've seen it, so both of these I haven't seen in a long time.
And both of those are Lewis Gilbert movies as well. Back to You Only Live Twice again.
Right.
Our trio this next time will be completed with For Your Eyes Only, which I remember very little of, the least of this bunch.
I'm in the same boat. This is going to be a memory catch up for me, but I have seen For Your Eyes Only more recently than the other two, but it's still been probably 7 or 8 years. So it's been a long time. And I hate to say it because that kind of speaks ill of how I might end up feeling about it, but I remember it less than the other two that I have seen far, longer ago. So it'll be an interesting trio we've got coming up. Breaking them up in the threes has been interesting. I feel like every time we've come to an episode, it's been an interesting trio to talk about.
Yeah, in so many ways, yeah.
And this will also bring us through the 70s and into the 80s. Is a very interesting decade for Bond anyway.
Right.
We're going to have a lot to talk about next episode and the next couple of episodes, because Bond goes through several different transformations just in that decade. In turn, even within Roger Moore and the next handoff that's coming up, the 80s is a very interesting decade. So that's going to be exciting to kind of get to that point. But I'm very interested to watch Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker again, just because of how long it's been. But I want to see if my feelings on Moonraker were accurate, or if or if there is some gem among a turd that I missed back then. But I think we both agree that Thunderball is the worst one of the bunch at this point that we've gotten to in the series.
At this point, easily.
Uh,
Yeah.
the quality of the series has been pretty consistent. We've only had one movie kind of fall below 005 so far. But I can't wait to talk about the next two, specifically in the next three, and see where we line up. Uh, because my memory is very hazy on all three of these. So I honestly, it's going to be like watching them for the first time.
And that's fun in and of itself. I I will say, I think it's interesting the way that you pitched that, which is not untrue, to say that we've been in solid territory so far, and in a way, we're stepping further into relatively inconsistent territory for the Bond series. And on the other side of this terrain, I guess we'll
Right.
see where we stack up and what that means. But I will say this: here's a question, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to it. But you mentioned on Live and Let Die, obviously the ending kind of teases the possibility, at least, of a returning villain. Have we ever seen to this point a returning henchman?
I don't.
Because I don't
I don't
remember,
think we have.
and I don't think
I
we
don't
have.
think we have. We've had a returning villain, just Blofeld, but not a henchman.
Yes,
Not a henchman.
and we're going to have that in the very next episode.
The henchmen usually always die, so they're not around to come back anyway. So
Right.
yeah, that's usually how it goes. I would have loved for Robert Shaw to have survived from Russia with Love and come back in another Bond movie. But yeah, we will get our first recurring henchman.
And that'll be fun to talk about for a variety of reasons. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it, as always. But yeah, this is uh, For Your Eyes Only is going to feel like the first time. I might have a refreshment as I'm watching it, like thinking, "Oh yeah, this movie," and I don't know if that's going to be a good feeling or a bad feeling, or maybe just a purely unmemorable feeling. I guess we'll find out. I guess we will close things off for now. Been a pleasure, Drew. going through these 3 movies with you.
Yes.
Thanks everyone for sticking through with us, and we'll see you on the next episode as we continue trucking through 007 here on Movie Marathon Mood.